отсюда! Блядь, где Selydove лежит на дороге? Кому подбегла? Нихуя себе, блядь! Вот ебать их на хуя, блядь! Валера, блядь, сзади дивись, чтоб не выскочила обезьяна! Ебать их тут нахуй! Сука, блядь! Вот, следующий перебил. Да. Ебать их на улице, пидорас! Я ебу, блядь. Ну, может, развернется, да и дальше же. Не, дальше. Вот перекресток.
For the past week, the situation around Selydove was in the center of attention on the front line. Ukrainian analysts and media admit that it is becoming more tense and critical every day. Even in European media, the concern for the town's survival is being expressed by Euronews.
Russian forces are pushing to enter Selydove, trying to claim control over parts of the town, Ukrainian military says, noting that on Wednesday only Moscow attacked the town 19 times using a large number of infantry. Now, the Institute for the Study of War confirms Russia's significant tactical advances into and around Selydove in recent days.
Selydove, like many of the villages and towns that litter the Donbas region, is a mining town, located 15 kilometers from the major logistics center and defense line city of Pokrovsk. The Russians, after making rapid headway in the direction of Pokrovsk over the past few months, slowed their advance and decided to focus on widening its southern flank, with the main goal being to capture Selydove. For the Russians, capturing Selydove is a major prerequisite for further advancement to Pokrovsk. This key fortress city is being defended by the 15th Karadag Operational Brigade of the Ukraine Armed Forces. The situation began to deteriorate in earnest this past Monday, the 21st of October, as Russian forces moved additional reserves to Selydove from the north of the Pokrovsk direction, according to Ukrainian media. The Russians are attacking the town from the north, south, and southwest. In the north and southwest directions, the Russians focus on cutting the logistics route to Pokrovsk and the road through Vishnevy. From the east, the Russians have entered the city itself. It is admitted by Ukrainian analysts that the Russians have had tactical success using the advance of small infantry groups. Nevertheless, the Russians' advance is attributed to their advantage in personnel. The intensity of the Russian attack is described as being quite high by Ukrainian soldiers. In between infantry attacks, they say, the Russians' artillery is actively working. Despite these successes, a Ukrainian military expert by the name of Dmytro, who is also the co-chairman of the Prava Sprava NGO, believes it will be difficult for the Russians to continue to advance after Selydove. He said in an interview with Ukrainian media that the Russians have quite serious defense lines of the Ukrainian defense forces ahead. We are talking about the Pokrovsk agglomeration as well as the Sloviansk and Kramatorsk agglomerations, which are large industrial cities. Even though the Russians are using flanking techniques and their small cauldron tactics, which means that the Russians are not engaging in assault operations directly in urban areas, the Ukrainian military expert assesses that the further Russian advances in these industrial cities will take a rather serious period of time. I, of course, see it quite differently, as I set out in this past video here. Once the Russians cut the main supply road from Pokrovsk to the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk defense lines, half the battle for the Donetsk Oblast is over. Much of the Russian success in the Donetsk Oblast has been attributed to Russian tactics and the increasing advantage in personnel over Ukraine. But recently, some Western analysts have begun to also acknowledge the superiority of Russian equipment, particularly the Russian tanks. And no, it's not the modern T-90 or the T-14 Armata tanks that is being hailed by Western media. Rather, and perhaps surprisingly to some, It is the Soviet-era T-72 main battle tank that, according to a Western think tank, is, and I quote, outperforming even newer tank models like the NATO-supplied systems like the US Abrams and the German Leopard 2. So today I will expound upon my last video, which covered the recent encirclement around Selydove. I will also cover a bombshell article from a US think tank that praises the effectiveness of the Russian Soviet-era T-72 tank, which it claims has proven to be the most effective battlefield tank in Ukraine. And if you stick to the end, I have a dated clip from about a year ago of an epic speech given by a Russian soldier in the trenches of Bakhmut, echoing these same sentiments. In essence, the illusion of Western superiority in warfare has been shattered by the Ukraine war. So hit that like button, hit the notification bell, and subscribe. And most of all, leave a little love by a super chat or super thanks donation. And let's get into it. As of October 24th, the BBC Russian service media reported that the Russian armed forces brought down the Ukrainian defenses in Selydove, breaking into the city center and taking control of its southern part. Other Telegram channels posted videos of the Russians raising the Russian flag on one of the city's high-rise buildings. One particular Telegram channel from a pro-Ukrainian account published these statements. The opponent has access in the center. The occupiers enter Selydove in whole platoons. Crews of FPV drones make 100 or more flights per day purely by enemy infantry. The enemy successfully penetrates and disperses to houses and basements. The importance of Selydove is that if left uncaptured, it poses a threat to the Russian advance to Pokrovsk from Rodovka and Novorodovka, as the fortress town permits an opportunity for Ukrainian defenders to launch a dangerous counterattack on the southern flank of the Russian advance. A Russian military instructor said on Telegram channel as follows: "We need to capture Selydove and break through to KURAKHOVE. To solve the problem of providing the southern flank of the center group, very significant forces and means were distracted and spread over a wide front, as a result of which the pace of the Russian offensive toward Pokrovsk was slowed." According to one of the Ukrainian servicemen within the city itself, Russian infantry is trying to infiltrate between Ukrainian positions in the Selydove town, even without being entrenched. There is also information that the Russians have managed to get fresh reserves. This is known from the words of one of the prisoners captured by Ukrainian troops. So the fighting currently occurs in the city itself. The Ukrainian defenses are apparently denser in the northern and northwestern parts of the city. According to some reports from Ukrainian sources, the Ukrainian Defense Forces now have control over only about 10% of the territory of Selydove. Other reports say that the Russians, as of October 25th, occupied approximately 40 to 50% of the city. The overwhelming majority of experts advise for the withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from Selydove. The seizure of the territory by the Russians to the north and south of the city poses a serious threat to the logistics of Ukrainian troops in the city. Some experts also speak about fighting already occurring in Vishnevy itself. If one of the routes is cut and captured by the Russians, it will create significant risks for Ukrainian units. To be specific, Ukrainian analyst Sergei Gurets commented that Selydove is vulnerable because of two roads that ensure the functioning of the town. One leads to Vishnevy, and the advance to this settlement by rail has now become possible for the Russians after their capture of Sukhorin and Ukrainsk. After the capture of Novorodovka, the situation has become more complex due to disruptions to logistic routes supplying Selydove. The situation in the area will depend on the balance of forces and means available to both sides. In that light, Ukrainian analysts estimate that Russia has about 70,000 troops operating in the Pokrovsk direction, with about 15,000 of these held in reserve. They are accompanied by around 1,000 artillery systems, which is the highest concentration on all fronts. Mr. Gurets commented that the combination of artillery manpower and electronic warfare significantly impacts the Ukrainian armed forces' defenses. If Selydove is captured, the Russians, he said, will use the road to Pokrovsk as one of the ways for their further advance. The Institute for the Study of War, whose analysis often finds creative ways to provide support to a pro-Ukrainian outlook, claims that the Ukrainian defense of Selydove fulfilled its main task, which was to delay the Russian offensive, exhaust their troops, and provide time to further strengthen the defense of Pokrovsk. BBC Russian service quoted the Institute as saying, "Russia may well take Selydove in the coming days, but its capture does not foreshadow the capture of Pokrovsk." BBC Russia, however, concluded its report by acknowledging that the events of recent months show that the Russian command, although slowly, manages to solve tactical problems, and that one of the tasks will be solved by the capture of Selydove.
Блядь! Сука!
Nazar Voitenkov, acting press officer of the 33rd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Ukraine Armed Forces, said that the Russians continue an intensive offensive in the KURAKHOVE direction. According to him, the situation on the left flank of the defense is quite difficult, in particular in the area of Maximilianivka and Hirovika towards KURAKHOVE. Voitenkov said that the 33rd Brigade continues to hold the defense at the designated positions. He noted that due to the complex defense, they are able to hold back the enemy, but the Russians are actively acting on the flanks. He compared the situation in the KURAKHOVE direction to the fighting near Selydove, where the occupiers are also trying to outflank the town. Voitenkov noted that if the invaders manage to advance further, it will be more difficult to hold the line. He added that it would be easier to hold the defense if Ukrainian Defense Forces units received proper replenishment in personnel and equipment. He also said that the Ukrainian armed forces are using Leopard tanks in the defense of KURAKHOVE. And speaking of tanks, it appears Western analysts are now readily admitting that there is simply no match for the Russian tanks. And we aren't even talking about Russia's elite T-90 or T-14 Armata tank. The truth is, Western tanks cannot compare to the Soviet-era T-72 Russian tanks. The US think tank National Interest said that the simplicity, adaptability, and cost-effectiveness makes the T-72 ideal for harsh conditions of trench warfare in Ukraine. Enhanced with reactive armor and countermeasures, the T-72 remains highly resilient despite losses. Its ability to withstand minefields and engage in brutal combat has made it, and I quote, a reliable, lethal platform, reinforcing its role in Russia's military strategy. Brendan Whiteshirt, the author of the article, who is a former congressional staffer and geopolitical analyst, even went as far as to say this quote, which will grind the teeth of all those Westerners who think America's army and technology is superior. And here it goes. I said it before, and I'll say it again. The Soviet-era T-72 main battle tank is the best tank in the world. No, it's not high-tech or fancy in any way, like the American Abrams or the German Leopard 2, but it gets the job done. This reality, which is only now being admitted by the West in 2024, was known to me since 2023, when I first saw this Russian soldier's epic speech in the trenches near Bakhmut, where he said the very same thing, only with more passion and detail.
Вот я за все расскажу в общем. Вот у нас в обществе, блядь, благодаря, блядь, контролю, блядь, за интернетом американцами, нахуй, полностью глобально контролируется, блядь, эта вся хуйня, информационные потоки, нахуй. Это уже, блядь, длится, нахуй, с 90-х годов. У нас поколению внушили, нахуй, что у них все там заебато, все охуенно, рай на земле, светочи демократии и все дела, нахуй. А у нас все говно, правительство говно, депутаты говно, блядь, менты козлы, блядь, всюду, блядь, дерьмо, говно одно нахуй. Хотя, блядь, дорог понастроили хуйло тучу. В каждой семье, блядь, машин ебаться в рот нахуй. 1-2 точно есть. У кого нету машины в семье, это просто он не хочет ее купить нахуй. Или не может, потому что не имеет прав нахуй. А и при желании, то есть, как поднялось благосостояние после 90-х, охуенно. А нам все время впаривают, что мы живем в говне и в дерьме, а Запад живет, вот пример на войне нахуй, ебаный рот. Самые крутые в мире, блядь, леопарды, блядь. Это пиздец, это супер техника, супер пиздец вообще нахуй, ебаный рот нахуй, блядь. Приехали нахуй и умылись тут нахуй все, блядь, кровью нахуй, эти леопарды. Ни автоматозаряжания, ни хуя ничего нет. Все, блядь, нахуй тяжеленные, буксуют, нихуя толку от них нет. Вон их похуярили сколько, напротив нас, вот здесь нахуй, ебать. Кладбище нахуй устроили, ебаный рот. Точно так же с их самыми крутыми Абрамсами будет. Тоже это все распиаренная хуйня. И так во всем. Любой наш автомобиль возьми военный нахуй, блядь, и ихний нахуй. У нас, блядь, жрет, что хочешь нахуй, блядь. На коленке можно сделать, отремонтировать. У нас, блядь, техника, блядь, вот эта вся, она предназначена для войны. А у них она предназначена для тухлых, блядь, понтов нахуй, блядь. Вот попонтоваться, смотри, как он крутой, у него там то, все, хуе-мое, нахуй, ебать. Вот покупайте наш, они же, сука, торгаши, нахуй. Вот они и впаривают по всему миру. Их не Патриот, нахуй, в жопе, нахуй. Сука, нахуй, наш, блядь, самолет, нахуй, за раз, блядь. Он, блядь, выпускает 35 всех своих ракет, нахуй, по ложным целям, нахуй. И наш самолет его спокойненько въебывает. Охуенно супер патриот, нахуй, которым всем впаривают. Саудовской Аравии, Корее, блядь, Японии, Европе, блядь, всем-всем. А мы, оказывается, вот так, опа, имеем, нахуй, и все. И чё, нахуй, это американцы, нахуй? Да обосрались, нахуй, и еще обосрутся, нахуй, блядь. У меня все, нахуй.
Отлично, спасибо.